program manager of our online tutoring program, as well as one of our instructional coaches. I have been with Math-A-Matics for a little over a year now, excited to share these ideas with you. In my other life, I was an instructional specialist and assistant principal in some Texas school districts, and very much worked with high emergent bilingual populations. So we are excited to just share our experiences with you. Miss Randall, our other Jessica, you get Jessica squared this evening. Miss Randall, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Absolutely. Hello, everyone. My name is Jessica Randall. I have been with the company for 2 years now. I think this month makes 2 years. Woo, 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 woo. I serve as a program manager here. Before I was with Mathematics, I taught high school geometry and algebra in New York City. So I'm not originally from Houston or Texas, but came down here about 2 years ago and have been locked in with Mathematics ever since.
Well, we are excited. We've got a variety of experience. We also have just a few other people that might pop on from our company to share ideas with you, and we are excited to get going. So Jessica's going to get us going with our agenda this evening.
Yes, so today we are going to start with going over our goals and the agenda. Then we're going to talk about what it looks like to have to create a culturally inclusive classroom. Then we're going to go over some instructional strategies that will best support our multilingual learners. Then we're going to talk about some ways that we can increase our language and communication support for our multilingual learners, and with some questions and answers and close. And so here are our goals for today's training. We will explore and discuss how inclusive classroom environments, effective instructional strategies, and targeted language supports can drive mathematical understanding for multilingual learners. And this is our hope for you all, that you will develop at least one actionable idea to foster equitable learning opportunities for your learners.
We definitely want to make sure we're providing great learning opportunities for all of our learners. And today we're going to specifically focus on those multilingual learners. And we're going to kind of do it through 3 ways. So this is our breakdown of our webinar this evening, just so you have a little idea where we're going. And mind you, all of this information absolutely could be a half day, full day training. There's a lot of information that can be poured into this. We've truncated it for this evening. So please know that there is so much more in depth that we are ready, willing, and able to share with you in future opportunities. So our first little section, welcome, Kiana. Oh, I think Kiana's been with us before too. I'm excited to see you back, Kiana. So today, our components of our webinar, we're going to create an inclusive classroom environment. So starting with discussing a culturally responsive environment that values those diverse backgrounds and makes math learning relevant and engaging. We're going to go into some instructional strategies that make things scaffolding, visuals, collaborative learning ready for our learners, and then also the language and communication supports that can be used to share those ideas. So participation is encouraged. Make sure you are joining and jumping in that chat throughout the different questions that we have open. We want it as collaborative as possible. And so all participants are entered for a chance to win a prize to support your multilingual learners. So we're going to be looking in the chat, taking those answers and pulling from one of those active participants to win a prize.
Yep.
So we're creating an inclusive environment. So section 1 kind of goes in this, and we start with this opportunity. So I want you to just get your ideas thinking, and you're more than welcome to add this to the chat. What does a culturally responsive math classroom look like in your school? Okay. And so when we're talking about defining culturally responsive teaching, what does that look like? What does that mean? So please make sure you're adding to the chat any of your information about that. We're looking for that opportunity to provide that cultural competence, right? We have students that come from many different backgrounds. And so with this, we're looking for ways to make sure that we as educators are knowledgeable about the different opportunities, the different places our students come from, the different ways things are expressed in their home language, their native language. We also want to, we've got some great answers in the chat too, Jess, that we're going to be able to share those out. We also want to set high expectations. So just because we are providing these opportunities for our second language learners, we still have to expect them to rise to the level of the content that we're teaching. So how are we going to be able to do that? And then student-centered learning is important as well. And so we've got some great answers coming up. Cynthia talked about visuals and accountability talks. And so not just, accountability, but goal setting is a great thing also to provide, not just their goals for academics, but also building their language. We had Kiana mention also that pictures with vocabulary. So when we're going through that, we're going to see a main theme of visual supports going through. And I
Yeah.
know you're going to talk about that in a little bit. We
Okay.
also want to talk about learning experiences that allow students to connect. And that's absolutely right. So we're going to kind of go into that as we go through. So the question comes up, why should we acknowledge a multilingual learner's background and culture? So we know as educators, as administrators, as specialists, you have a jam-packed to-do list. And so here's why we must show that value for the cultural differences. First of all, it's building that trust and engagement. Okay. We want these opportunities for all of our learners, and this should be your goal in any classroom, but especially for our students, that build that trust and engagement. If it's a low risk, safe environment, you're going to build up that opportunity for them to have those conversations, which also goes into increasing confidence. We want to enhance our learning connections to the real world. So one of the best ways we can bridge the language gap that might be there is that opportunity to really look at how things connect, what they already know to their prior knowledge, and allow them that opportunity to feel successful and also promote equality. So we absolutely want these opportunities for students to feel like they are able to be successful and that they are a part of the learning. We don't want to isolate any learners, and so by providing this opportunity where everyone's background is celebrated and valued, we're able to build in some of these components to our classroom structure. And so, kind of going into that a little bit more, talks about the classroom norms and expectations. So, by providing some of these language supports, we're going to allow students to help grow mathematically with all different backgrounds. And so, kind of like we've talked about, I've heard several times the visuals, the different graphics that we're using, and that builds into your word walls, your cognate charts, your sentence starters. And so, we see a few examples of those right there. We'll be going into this in more detail in the future sections. We also want to value multiple ways of thinking. So, again, math is
Mhm.
a universal language, but we also need to look at the ways that we're solving problems. So, absolutely recognizing that there are many methods to solve the math problems, and also highlight those diverse problem solving strategies, giving those students that opportunity to have those wins where they build that confidence and they're going to build on that from there. And so, again, we're going to kind of go into that into our future sections.
Yeah.
So our first discussion, and remember, we absolutely want to have you add these to the comments, and we'll be highlighting some of this, but talking about potential barriers that multilingual learners face in traditional math instruction. And so as you're kind of adding that, I know one of the things that I saw a lot of the times in the classroom is those visuals that everyone continues to mention are important because some of those
Yeah.
those abstract concepts are very abstract. And so, we think of cognates, but not every word in the math vocabulary has a cognate. And so that word in their native language may mean something
Mhm.
completely different. And if we're not aware of that, we might be setting up students for misconceptions, and different struggles as they're going through. Vocabulary continues to, okay, we have
Yeah.
several people adding vocabulary is important. And that'll go into our second section as well, the importance of that explicit vocabulary. When we're teaching that vocabulary, it has to be explicit. And I know you're going to talk about that in just a few minutes. We've
Yeah.
got a few more. Absolutely. Cynthia said, understanding what the question is asking us to do, and what operation. And so, the old school method was we would use those keywords, right,
Comprehension.
Jessica? We'd use those keywords, and if we
Yeah.
said
Mhm.
total, we meant add, right? And so we have to get away
Yeah.
from those old school just keywords, because that again is building up some of those misconceptions that we don't necessarily want.
Absolutely.
Definitely, we talk about comprehension and decoding. So what are we doing to allow the students the opportunity to feel safe as they're going through? And our math tests, our science tests are absolutely
Mhm.
reading tests also. That's a great
Yeah.
also. Kiana mentioned that from metric to base 10. So in the United States, we use that base 10. We use the customary units, and a lot of other countries are using those metric units. And so that can also be somewhere where we've got to build in. So some great answers. We
Yeah.
appreciate that, and we'll continue to add those. We'll bring those up, and they may cycle back through this next section. So we absolutely want to continue to see your input about those barriers that have faced in your classroom or that you've seen with your teachers that you support.
All right, now we're going to go to our next section on where we're touching on those instructional strategies for our multilingual learners. Let me just go ahead and move on. All right, so we're not just going to state the strategies as well. We're also going to talk about the why, the meaning, why it's important, why it's necessary to do these strategies for our students. We want to make sure that our students that are from different backgrounds can have, the practices that will support them the best. We want to make sure that they can have equity, that they can be confident, that they can feel comfortable. Like you said, have that comprehension, understanding what the question is saying. So making sure we're having those pictures that help them draw an example in their mind or connect to something from back home or to something that they've learned. You know what I'm saying? So that they're able to move forward and progress with the rest of the class. We don't want any of our multilingual learners left behind, right? And again, get used to that language, that familiarity, so that there's no barriers between. So one instructional strategy and best practice is visual aids and manipulatives, right? So let's give the definition, which is that they'll use representations and objects so they can conceptualize those ideas. And not only that, but if they're able to have the visual aids, this can support their English language learning. They can understand the course material because they'll have that information. They'll help them visualize the language abstractions, improve their memory. There's so many benefits with having a visual aid for students, like all of y'all said in the comments already, that those pictures, making sure that we're providing examples for students. And some benefits mentioned here, it lowers that cognitive load. It doesn't, that all of the thinking doesn't have to depend on them, especially when they're already learning a new language. It's the last thing we want to do. And supports the comprehension, what you guys said. So we have a picture of some blocks as well that students can use as they're counting or as they're working on things. Oh, and yep, see, we see in the comment, it's a great point. It's not just elementary. We need it at all levels. Thank you so much for that comment. We want to make sure that we're supporting them throughout. Go ahead, Jess.
Well, I think it's so important, just like was mentioned. A lot of people think that these manipulatives and hands-on things are only for elementary, but especially when you have maybe a new arrival center at the secondary level. At the secondary levels,
Mm-hmm.
especially here in Texas, we're not doing a second language support. They are expected to test in English. They are expected to be taught in English. And so,
Mm-hmm.
what are we doing to support completely building a new language
Yep.
without that language support in their native tongue? And so manipulatives, fraction bars, even just different pictures as you're going through vocabulary and your word wall are going to be so crucial. And so people forget that in a lot of states in the secondary they are expected to have that in language, but if they are new to our state, new to our country, and are brand new to the language, we've got to find ways to bridge those gaps. And especially algebra tiles, the hands-on
Yeah.
equations where we're doing from a concrete to something representational to that abstract is going to be vital.
Yeah, absolutely. And so now we'll go to our next point where we're talking about explicit vocabulary instruction. Just like this is beneficial for our native language speakers, right? It's even more so for our multilingual learners, right? If they know that math vocabulary, when they see it on the exam, when they see it on test, they're not going to be thrown off by it. So even if we want to, again, translate it for them, still making sure that they know what it is super helpful. Emphasizing the academic language and key terms. So here you'll see in these pictures, we have, the more than, the less than, and even though it's translated, it's still the same as what they would be learning in English. So we don't want to take away from that vocab that they need, that content vocabulary that they need. This allows them to make connections between the native and the second language. So they're not there. There's no differentiation in their eyes and from the uh, total physical, yeah, and from the content. There's no difference, right? We want to make sure that they're getting all that they need, especially as teachers or as, principals or however whoever we have on here, just making sure we're providing that for our learners so they're not left behind again.
And this was one that we really worked on when we were doing this vocabulary, is providing some kinesthetic learning. So total physical responses for them to work through making connections to the words they saw. And it was the cutest
Like
thing,
even
because we'd be doing a benchmark on campus, or a
mhm,
CFA to check for understanding, and you'd see the kids like doing their hand motions the different ways for greater
mhm,
than or less than,
mhm.
practicing with the angles and
Love
doing the
that.
things that we taught them. So it truly made that impact on their learning, that they were pulling on that during assessment time to be able to be successful. So, it's one of those things where, it feels a little silly as a teacher, but those are the things that stick with our learners, that we're providing that opportunity to connect to these words that may not have any other connection, giving them something that they can move their hands to look in the room for those words that were on the word wall, things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually love that. Um, oop. And I will go to our next one, which is modeling and thinking aloud. So, we as educators want to make sure that when we're solving a problem or discussing a problem, that we're showing our kids. It's one thing to model, and it's another thing to think aloud. So, with modeling, we get to show our kids step by step how to solve something so that they're able to do it themselves as well, replicate it. But with thinking aloud, we're showing them how we're processing the information that we're seeing and internalizing it so that we can solve. We're teaching them the strategy to solve, or at least the way that we approach it. And that then builds their confidence, or at least gives them an idea, okay, this is how Miss Sanchez thought about it. Okay, this makes sense. These are the questions I need to ask myself when I'm approaching this problem, right? This allows the learners to see how to approach it and reduces their cognitive load. So we want to make sure that we're doing that for our students as well, especially multilingual learners.
Especially, it's we're providing them a starting point, a scaffold, and building on maybe something they've seen before, and connecting to those general steps. Graphic organizers are an amazing resource right here as well, to go with that modeling and thinking aloud, that you're going to have the anchor charts up that are a graphic opportunity for them to also relate back to, so they can think, okay, step one was in that corner of the room, and go through and relate back to what was there before.
Yeah,
And here we go for
absolutely.
cooperative learning.
Thanks. So yes, our next strategy is cooperative learning and peer support. So in this, and it's always a best practice to have your students work with a peer. So they can have somebody to build ideas off of, especially for multilingual learners. If you have a student that's learning the language, they can talk to each other. They can talk to each other about the problem. They'll get more comfortable with somebody who they're in their classroom with, and that connection then promotes them like being more comfortable to ask a question, right? Someone mentioned earlier feeling safe to ask questions. If they can talk with their peer about it, they then build that confidence to, if their questions not answered by a peer, then ask a teacher. Like their peer will encourage them to do that. There's no like they won't be scared either. At the end, we see vocabulary in a low risk environment. There's no like they're not put on the spot because they're with a friend, right? So we want to make sure that we're encouraging things like that for our multilingual learners, so that they're able to build those communication skills, practice, practice, and then not feel pressured at all as they're learning something new that's unfamiliar.
Um, you know,
Oh
it,
yes. Hmm. Oh, sorry. I
absolutely.
just saw a
There you
comment.
go.
Yes, they will ask a classmate quicker than they will a teacher. Yep, they will.
Absolutely. When the students are able to explain to each other, we also know that those other students who maybe are at a more advanced or advanced high of their language acquisition, if they're able to explain it to a peer, we also can do a formative check right there and say they have a bit deeper understanding of the content. So this is multifaceted in a way that's going to be a good formative check for your classroom as well. That low risk environment is so safe. When you have the lower confidence, not only in the language, but also the content, talking out loud to the class and answering something is just can be very scary. It's scary to us as adults
Yeah,
to have
Yeah,
that conversation and get called out. So the opportunity to do those
absolutely.
formative checks as they're doing partner conversations around the room, definitely making sure we're supporting the vocabulary as we go through is also going to be crucial. But it just provides just a great opportunity. Those think, pair, share, where they think about it individually, then they discuss. So you can also make sure they're doing some independent work before they move into that student peer check with each other.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yes, and then last but not least, we have our graphic organizers. This is a great strategy for students because they're able to kind of see, obviously, their organizer and organize their ideas or make a connection or make a relationship between what they're learning and like what an example would be, what a non-example would be, and this then solidifies that learning for them because they're able to at once they see the connections they can then understand this. It makes them like remember it better. It makes
Mhm.
them have that organization, and then they can always refer back to it. Having this organized, they can keep it in their folder, they can pull it out if they need to, and it just makes things like more bite-sized, if I can say that, more bite-sized for them, right? So it's not like they're getting chunks and loads of information, but they get to kind of put it in somewhere where it makes it streamlined for them, basically. Yeah.
Absolutely. And
Hmm.
again, we kind of mentioned at the beginning, all of these can be expanded upon so much. And for the sake of time, we
Absolutely.
just want to give you a preview. And then there's also going into scaffolding and differentiation, contextualized learning. There's so many different strategies that can support that. This could be a full day training just on these learning strategies and specific ways they look in your math classroom to support those learners. And this is just a brief little taste of what we could provide on a campus or district level PD.
Yes. So now we want to ask you guys another question. Which of the strategies that we've discussed do you think would have the biggest impact in your math classroom and why?
And so I think it's just so
Mhm.
crucial to share these
Yeah,
ideas with each other. And I love the opportunity that we have in these webinars because we might hear something just that's being done across the city, across the state, across the country, because we have people from all over in this training. And
yeah,
so thinking about just maybe you heard a strategy that's new for you. Kim mentioned that the graphic organizers are her go-to, and definitely that's a
yeah,
key one because you're using those as a teaching tool. You're using those for math journals, you're using those for anchor charts around the room. Graphic organizers have so many different uses other
yeah,
than, you
absolutely.
can use them in a variety of ways. So that's one tool to get really strong at, can be very, very beneficial.
Yeah,
We
in
also
my classroom as well, I use graphic organizers. My students loved it. Well, initially they were like, "Oh, we have to do this," but towards the end, they loved it. They felt like, oh, they would always bring it out whenever we were learning something. They love it all the time,
So
every
same thing.
time.
Cynthia and Stacy both mentioned also that those graphic organizers are a great resource. Thank you, ladies. And then we've
Mhm.
got a mention from Kiana, who said cooperative learning and peer support. And I think that's one of the
Mhm.
things. One of our other trainings that we do is on that meaningful student discourse, and we'll talk a little bit more on it in section 3. But setting up the conversations in your classroom so that your cooperative learning and peer support is going to get you the most yield for that strategy. So that's definitely one to work through and really know well as any kind of teacher, but especially for your multilingual learners. We also
Yeah,
know that graphic organizers are great study aids also. So multiple uses, and we absolutely love the participation.
yeah,
Thank you all. We're going to kind of go into this next little section too. So remember, just add any questions that you have, thoughts to the chat. We absolutely want you to continue to participate, and we appreciate it so far this evening. And kind of section 3, talking about language and communication support. And before we move on, I just want to make sure we also recognize manipulatives to
oh
help us do
yes,
the tactile model. So, as we're
absolutely.
kind of going through our language and communication support, this can go in the chat. And this is just a think about. It's not necessarily discussion, but I thought it was a really key question. It says, if math is considered a universal language, why would we need to provide additional language supports for multilingual learners to be successful? And so what is it? Because we say, people go, "Oh, well, math is universal, so we should all do well with that." So why are we providing these additional supports and doing this extra? to make sure our multilingual learners are successful. So feel free to add your thoughts on that, and we'll kind of go into it as we go into this next section for sure.
Yeah.
And so, starting with quick checks for understanding. So we talked a little bit about formative checks and saying how important it is to use these to gauge student comprehension. So, um, absolutely, Cynthia said that reading is huge for these math sections as well. So think about if we're going to do a thumbs up, thumbs down.
Yes.
So if I'm going to ask a question, think about your multilingual learners. If I'm going
Yeah.
to ask, which of these shapes is a quadrilateral, give me a thumbs up, thumbs down as you're clicking through pictures. How much are you actually gauging understanding from just this? Because I know a lot of students do a quick check around the room before they're going to give you that thumbs up, thumbs down. So as we're talking about maybe those same geometric figures, maybe we're going to ask them to do a quick write. So as we're going through, without these supports that we're building in, without this that we're setting up to support and help increase the learning, a quick write for a multilingual learner may be very short with not the information we need. So how are we going to truly gauge their comprehension without some
Right.
additional supports put in for those students? So when we're talking student discourse and responses, and it involves that structured conversation, and I know that we mentioned that this peer checks are so key to the room, and so we want to have them the opportunity to discuss their reasonings, how helping them solve problems, and so we kind of talked a little bit about how it helps them enhance the problem solving, but it also is
Mhm.
going to promote that deeper understanding through explanation and reasoning using that academic vocabulary. So when we're talking about those geometric figures, we want to make sure that our conversations are not just yes, no, but how are their responses going to be structured to provide that understanding. And I, this third one is kind of we tend to forget about it sometimes, but it fosters that sense of community and collaborative learning. So once again, that safety piece is crucial. So if you're building that community in the classroom where everyone knows that they're going to be able to share an answer out loud and not be made fun of, that they're going to be encouraged by their classmates and their peers and,
Yeah.
and their teacher, that's going to be
Right.
crucial to them feeling successful and building that community and collaboration where then moving forward, they're going to want to be able to share more. They're going to want to speak out, which is building those skills that we're wanting for our language acquisition.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so, talking about supporting structured math talk with students, it's crucial to provide the supports that build in those conversations. And so, kind of going through, you might drop a comment which of these you utilize the most in your classroom. Sentence stems and sentence frames. So, everybody tends to take that short answer yes, no, triangles, acute angle. Students will find the way to do the least possible. And so providing them sentence stems and sentence frames as part of their learning allows those students that are still building the language to have a safe way to build out their conversational skills. And so there's some examples there. It says when Jessica Randall said quadrilateral, I thought of quarter because the QUA makes me think of four. The
Mhm.
strategy that I used to compare fractions was drawing a picture. My
Right.
partner said, and really, the my partner said is a great one too, because they're able to share what their partner said and restate it in their own words, gives them that opportunity to feel safe because it's not their answer they're saying, it's someone else's, and they don't feel like, okay, I got it wrong. Cynthia mentioned the second question of why is key. It's that accountability talk again. So allowing them to build on that, and you can build those in with your sentence stems as well. And Kiana said the same thing. They're using Math Chat, so they provide those sentence stems. With the word bank, I wanted to make sure we kind of mentioned that it's a little different than the last one, academic word wall. If we are expecting students to have a true conversation academically as you're going through, and maybe again a geometry example, we want them to utilize the vocabulary. So if you're providing those sentence stems or frames that you want them to answer with, also providing a list of words that says angles, vertices, edges, faces, quadrilateral, triangle,
Mm.
hexagon. on, providing that list so that they can use that opportunity to go through and say, okay, here's words I can pick from, so that they're not, again, reducing that cognitive load so they can really think about their answer versus did I pick the right word. So word bank, when you're doing those answer alouds and things like that, help. Cognates are an amazing opportunity, and so there are those words that do translate more directly from first language to second language, so providing opportunities to showcase those. Multilingual dictionaries are also an important tool and that are able to be used on most of your math tests as well, if that's put in as a standard practice in your classroom. So you're wanting them to be able to know, okay, if I don't know this word, let me go look up the word to word translation so I can look, is it a
Mm,
or see what we're looking for.
yeah.
I think everyone kind of mentioned earlier those visuals. So with that academic word wall, don't let it just be a word wall. Allow them to have the visuals. I love student created too. I don't know if you did that in your classroom, Jessica, or not, but when we did our word wall, we were all creating our little word wall for our journal, but then they were getting the opportunity to create the visuals. And so the best one that week would go up on our class word wall because then they took that ownership and
Mm,
mine. And so they were able to look across the room and see that when they saw a picture of acute angles, it was their example that they had drawn. So it built that ownership and community as well. And so just again, just different ways you can support those. We could talk about this all night long because there's full day trainings you can do on supporting that structured math talk in the classroom.
I love that. I had my students draw theirs as well. Some were not that great, but I should have encouraged the ones that were really nice. But yeah, I had them do that, so they had that
Oh yeah,
ownership.
and I had to. Miss Sanchez had to do her examples as well. That had a stick
Yeah.
figure sometimes, and showing the
Uh-huh.
size comparison or something, just so they could see. Okay, you don't have to be a great artist to do a great word wall, but also for
Yeah,
some of your students who are still building the language but are strong with their artistic abilities, it gave them a chance to feel successful and seen.
absolutely.
And so again, we're building that community and building the safe space. And so when they have those small tastes of success, they can continue to build on that. So absolutely, just
Yeah.
different ways to bring everyone together. So again, thinking back to our original example, say we were comparing our different quadrilaterals, right? So if we're going to do a structured math talk, um, think about if you want to add a sentence frame that you could use to compare different quadrilaterals or things like that. We're going to just talk about it a little bit, but I want you thinking about this because this would be something you could do with your staff in a training, or we are more than happy to come out and provide some opportunities for, so we could go through and looking at, okay, a quadrilateral is different than a triangle because a blank is different than a blank because that why that we mentioned earlier with Cynthia is so crucial. Or you might say, I know that blank is a blank because, so I know that this is a triangle because it has three sides, three angles, and just encouraging them to build up that vocabulary is going to be
Yeah.
crucial to just giving them opportunities. And then, here's your quick check at the end of the classroom. Not only have you done a quick check, but you've provided a sentence stem and a word bank that they're going to pick those words from, so they're not worried about picking the wrong words and can truly showcase their learning. This repeated exposure and contextual learning, we kind of talked about it briefly in section 2. But that repetition and context are key because we don't want them to only think that we talk about area and perimeter when we're talking about geometric figures, because we can also use an area model and multiplication. So we're pulling back this vocabulary, we're pulling back these examples constantly, so we're make sure we're not learning in an isolation, which makes it more relevant. You're also looking at opportunities for real world examples. So how can we bring in opportunities to, we had an example at a training we went to this summer when they were talking about different figures. And so maybe they're bringing in a box of cereal and we're going to say this is a rectangular prism. They're bringing in a toilet paper roll and that's a cylinder. And so we're seeing these shapes in real life, getting the opportunity. We used to do geometry walks around the school. And so we were looking for these. And so later on, when my class was going through the hallway, they'd be like, look, I see an acute triangle. I see an equilateral triangle. They were looking for those things constantly. So we're relating it back to the vocabulary and also in their real world. As you're talking about money, when do they have to buy money? When do they have to buy, when do they have to
Yeah.
give change? Division is one of those concepts that they use so many times in the real world and they don't understand. And especially for fourth graders here, we have to interpret the remainders, which is a hard thing for us as adults sometimes. And so, what
Yeah.
opportunity do you have to bring in examples that are real world based that they can talk about interpreting a remainder and division? And that doesn't have to happen just during your division unit. It can be, okay, guys, we're about to separate into groups. I need groups of 3. I have 28 kids.
Wow.
What is this going to look like? How could we interpret this remainder, and what can we do to make sure that everyone's included? And so there we are. We're in the classroom. We're getting ready for a lesson, but we've brought in division and interpreting a remainder.
Yeah.
Where we might be doing an example, passing out manipulatives, and say, "Oh no, I only have this many markers. How can we make sure that everyone has what they need?" So those opportunities to make it meaningful and relevant, and not just a math word that they saw on a screen one time, is going to be just crucial to the success. So just kind of briefly, especially, many states have adopted standards to help students develop their content and language knowledge. And again, this is a full training in and of itself. But so thinking about how do the strategies we've talked about in section 2 and 3 help measure the growth in students listening, speaking, but also their reading and their writing. So, whenever we did a quick write, we might do a quick write before we give a verbal response, because then they're practicing putting their thoughts, ideas down on paper in written form, and then using that to feel more safe and secure as they verbally shared their answer to the class. And so building those opportunities, and especially as you're going through, you're going to have students of various levels of learning. In Texas, they're labeled beginner, intermediate, advanced, and advanced high. And so as you're lesson planning, not only are you planning for these strategies to support your multilingual learners, but you also have to think, I'm going to have some multilingual learners that are beginner level, some that are advanced high level. What does that look like different in your planning to provide the supports for that varied range of students as well? And so, just again, we want you to participate. So, please, please, you guys have been amazing so far. And all those active participants get that
Mhm.
opportunity. How to structure math talks increase your communication with multilingual learners. So, please just drop those comments in. I think especially the classrooms that I saw as an administrator that were most successful with their multilingual learners had built
Mhm.
this in throughout. So there was constant opportunities, and they felt very safe sharing out their answers to the class. And so how are we doing that and building that up? And so just definitely add your comments to the chat about the ways you've used structured math talk. Maybe you heard something different tonight that you're going to be able to use this week and bring into your classroom. How can this help increase that communication? You know, any classroom can be silent in the wrong way. We can always find conversation about the football game, the soccer game, the video game, the movie that's out. But how do we build that structured math talk? Because we want to have that conversation that's based on building our math learners in that multilingual sense. I love it. Cynthia says, opportunities for understanding, student to student, and reflection. Monitoring is key, as well as where
Mhm.
teachers know the student's work is correct. So I think that's a part of it too. Is we talk
Mhm.
a lot about formative assessment, and it should be a second nature thing for our educators, because you've got to monitor the conversations that are going around the room. You've got to monitor, is the vocabulary being used correctly, because you're looking for misconceptions and things like that. um, Student to student is so key. And a reflection, I love that also too, after a lesson. So sometimes your quick check is students telling each other one thing they've learned that day, and you're walking around to hear if things are being explained correctly. Miss Kiana mentioned she liked the example of students drawing out their thinking. They may not have the language, but they can understand the picture, especially
Yeah.
if you have your new arrivals or students who are still at those beginning levels. So this is where, as you're pulling small groups back to a table as a teacher, you can say, okay, explain this to me. And then you're helping them maybe dictate the words that they want to go on that, right? So that they're able to put the language with those pictures that they have. Being able to explain is so crucial. Great
Yeah.
answers, great answers. And certainly feel free to continue to add those, but we do appreciate your participation this evening. And just kind of one more thing, just you've heard us say several times about multilingual learners, but we also have the question like, how does this relate to other special populations? So,
Yeah.
your special education students, students who are on 504 plans, your low socioeconomic students, even your COVID students, because we still have students that are trying to close up those COVID gaps from 4 years ago, which is hard to believe it's been 4 years, but we still have students that are missing key information from
Yeah.
COVID time when they were virtual learning or, just still not getting that group conversation because we were very much isolated. And so all students can benefit from these strategies. It helps them build the background knowledge. It's one more opportunity to differentiate instruction and scaffold based on that prior knowledge, but also it makes that learning accessible and relevant. And that really should be our crucial takeaway is everything that we're doing here is not just to be thought of as one more thing that we're doing, but it should be something that we are
Yeah.
trying to make our learning accessible for everyone. We're trying to make it relevant and have those connections to their background experiences and their different cultures so that all of these students can feel successful in learning that math content.
All right. All right, now to go over our summary, just to touch on the things that we talked about. So
Yeah,
we talked about culturally responsive teaching, right? Ooh,
I just made it
oh,
bigger.
okay, great. Culturally responsive teaching, where we're making those connections with our students in the classroom. We're increasing engagement with our students because they're able to identify with whatever they're seeing, so they're not feeling left out. We talked about some instructional strategies for our multilingual learners. So being able to scaffold the learning, provide visuals, graphic organizers, collaboration, that peer-to-peer engagement, making sure that they're able to engage and access the learning. Yep, allowing for equity and decreasing those language barriers, right? As best as we can. We also then talked about language and communication support. So we're creating those communities where the students feel comfortable, where the students are able to collaborate, they feel valued, they feel included, and they're able to engage with the math, right? And like Jess mentioned, draw those pictures, still feel like they can have like they can be agents in their classroom, right, and own their learning. So, oh,
Absolutely. And Stacy mentioned that she thinks the STEMs help them with getting started on expanding their thinking. Sometimes it's hard to know where to start. And so, absolutely, if we give them a starting place, you would be
definitely,
surprised by how far they can take their answer because we've taken some of that just stress off. Kiana,
yeah,
great question. We're going to be going into that right now. So, Kiana's question kind of goes into what we are talking about. So, first, if you could choose a targeted professional development program focused on both math instruction and multilingual learners, what area of support would you choose? And like we said, we could have spent 6 hours going into this content today, as well as the different information we have on math talk, formative assessments, just different things,
mhm,
professional learning communities that we did this summer for our lunch and learns. And so, kind of going into that, we do offer a variety of PD that we can support and as well as instructional coaching, data analysis, things like that. So, Kiana, to answer your question, let's keep in touch. So, we are available to provide some campus and district based PD. It can be in person, it can be virtual. We have a variety of ways we can support you. So, this QR code on your screen can take you to a link to set up a consultation. We also have a number there, 832-598-7245, as well as partners at Math-A-Matics tutoring.com, our website. We're ready to discuss with you, Kiana, or any of our other participants, ways that we can support your
absolutely.
teachers, your district. We've done a variety of different PDs on a campus as well as district level. We are ready to support. So, Kiana, we would love to support you. Same for our other participants today. Thank you so much for joining us on this virtual training. And now, just any other questions you might have, you can drop them in the chat. But please make sure you scan that QR code because we do want to meet with your staff and help grow. We have a variety of offerings that we can do to help prepare your teachers to give the best math and science support that you might need. Definitely, we appreciate your participation this evening. We will be reaching out for our winner for our little prize as well.
Oh yeah.
Absolutely. Any other questions, please feel free to add them to the chat. We'll be here for a few more minutes ready to discuss any of that with you. Or definitely, we cannot wait to set up a time to discuss with your administrators, specialists, district level, curriculum folks, how we can best support with your math and your science at your campus or district level.
Yes, this was so great. I just wanted to, um, there was a question that we had asked, which was if math is a universal language, then why do we need the, I forgot the rest of the question,
Language
but
support. How do
language
we
support.
use
There we
it as
go.
language supports?
Yes, and we had a lot of great answers in the chat, but I don't think we really got to touch on those really quick. So I just want to make sure that we do speak to them. So let me see right here. The numbers, okay. Right here, there was someone, Miss Cynthia said, the numbers are universal, but the reading is huge. Yes, right. We see the numbers. Everybody can analyze the numbers. They know what 1, 2, 3, uno, dos, tres, or if you're Korean, 하나, 둘, 셋. But the reading, so breaking it down, understanding, comprehending what's being said, that's important. That's why we need those talking stems. That's why we need the pictures. That's why we need those things.
Well, it's not even just the math language. It's words like greater, less than. Those are
Right.
if we're asking for an example. So absolutely, Deidre said application is universal, but the context is not. So making sure we understand. There's just some of those math problems I know, especially are half a page long of reading. So
Right.
the students may understand how to do the computation. Can they take the problem apart and say, okay, what are we doing without just using keywords that we used to use in the old school days, right? So
Absolutely.
absolutely looking at the ways that they can build and support their language and grow from there. We definitely dropped some information also with the link in the chat. So there is a link in addition to that QR code if you want to pull the link from the chat to set up a consultation for how we can support you. We appreciate the participation this evening. We appreciate just these great answers and the melding of the minds. We know it is a Wednesday evening, and it takes that
Yeah.
special to pour into your teachers or your classroom. So we appreciate everyone's responses and joining us for this evening as well. All right, we're kind of going to get wrapped up unless there's any more questions, but we're going to be here for just a minute or so. So please feel free. Oh, thank you, Cynthia. We appreciate that, Miss Jackson. She said, thank you. Helpful and enjoyed the strategies and ideas. Confirm some of the strategies. Absolutely. It's
Oh,
always nice
awesome.
to hear things you're doing are on the right track, and then just even looking at creative ways. And like we said, this is just a little sample of the strategies. We can definitely go into more detail based on your grade level, based on your campus's needs. If there's an area that we're looking at your TELPAS scores and we see that your speaking strategies are weaker or your writing strategies are weaker, we can definitely build into that as well for our Texas districts. And so we can definitely tailor this base to support those areas that you need to grow. But I agree. It's always nice to have that confirmation that you're on the right track. So thank you for those kind words, Miss Jackson. Give everybody just a minute. We are here if you have any more questions, comments, concerns, but we cannot wait to meet with you on a consult to get specifically into the needs that we can support for your staff and your students, because that's really what we're here for. We are here to look at the best ways to make math and science accessible for all learners and just help them feel that confidence that they know that they can achieve. And so we can definitely support you in many, many ways. We're going to give everybody just a minute, but we do appreciate we'll be reaching out. And if you need anything, of course, you can reach out to that partner's email and you can just say Jessica 1 or Jessica 2. Neither one of us are ready to also provide whatever
Absolutely.
interest maybe if you have a question come up later that you thought about as a result of this training. We can definitely support you with that. All right.
Yeah, I think that,
Okay, so we
yeah.
do look forward to talking to you in the future. We have some future webinars also coming up, so we definitely look for those emails and join us because we love preparing these to just share with you and help your staff and your campus be prepared, or for you as the teacher for your classroom. So definitely look out for future webinars, and we cannot wait to share an evening with you again.
Yes.
Everybody have a great evening.
Have
Thank
a
you for
great
joining us tonight.
night. Ouch.